I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to DeMarcus Suggs, Director of Creative and Cultural Economy for the City of Memphis. So stay with us for a conversation with DeMarcus, and a special thanks to our sponsor, Youth Villages. DeMarcus, thanks for being here.
Thank you
Appreciate
for having me, Eric.
We're up here on the 10th floor of the Crosstown Central Atrium, just with lots of real live ambient sound all around us.
Beautiful light, too.
Yeah, beautiful
Natural light.
Yeah, it's always worth it to be up here, except when there's a lighted Christmas tree that's was 7 stories tall being taken down next to it. So. But thanks for being here. We met really briefly some weeks ago at a Hyde Foundation thing, which we'll talk about that. And but for people who don't know, haven't heard about this role, it's an interesting title, but it maybe doesn't capture everything. How do you summarize what you're doing, and then we'll talk in more detail?
Yeah, so the City of Memphis, through Mayor Young's administration, launched the Office of Creative and Cultural Economy to, one, strengthen what we know as the creative economy, which is our arts and culture, cultural organizations, our individual artists who are also entrepreneurs in their own right, but truly they are usually sole entrepreneurs. And then the businesses that benefit from being proximal to the creativity that happens in Memphis. And so we're doing that. We're also charged with, retaining and attracting new talent. And last but not least, applying the art's ability to apply creative solutions to some of the challenges that we experience in Memphis. And so all of that to say that we're using creativity as a viable opportunity to invest and strengthen our economy.
That was great. It's like you know what you're doing.
Kind of, sort of.
Have you answered that question a lot since you've been here? Like, what are you doing?
Times,
we're excited, but what are you doing?
Yeah.
Is it, I imagine lots of questions people have, and some of these things I know, but I'll pretend to know. Is it a funding organization? Is the whole idea that you'll be funding individual artists or arts organizations?
Absolutely. So there's a funding or a grant making component to the work. But I think what is really cool about this office versus our colleagues at Arts Memphis or any of the other intermediaries is that we get to really think about what does a catalytic investment look like and partnerships across sector, so bringing in public, for-profit, and the third sector nonprofit entities to really create something that's not in existence, or to leverage existing partnerships that might be happening on small scale, and really be using our platform and our positionality as government to ensure the success of those things.
And one thing you talk about the partnerships, which we'll get into more of that, but part of it is you are actually funded by Hyde Foundation,
right.
AutoZone, the McInerney Foundation, Family Foundation. Are those the main entities?
Yeah.
So it's not city taxpayer dollars at this point. There's a 2-year grant, I guess, to fund you and maybe a couple other positions. Do I have that correct?
Yep. So it's not just me, thankfully. It's me and 2 other positions that we're going to be hiring for in the next couple months here. But we are completely supported by private philanthropy for the first 2 years. That was with the intention of being able to take some risk and to establish an office. And so we're really thankful that our friends at Hyde Family Foundation, namely Rachel Knox, is really spearheading this work. But she and the entire organization are helping to coordinate, and fundraise for with us, so that we can, see what sticks, for the first year.
And this is where I should disclose, Hyde Family Foundation has been a supporter of Daily Memphian, really, I think, since the beginning, as the McInerney Foundation has funded us as well. Kevin McInerney is on our board at the Daily Memphian. And I believe both entities, in some form or fashion, have probably funded WYXR as well. So those are my disclosures there. So, if a year from now, we're sitting here, as I hope we are, and talking about your first year plus, you started in October, late October, you will feel like you've been successful if what sorts of things have happened?
Yeah, we will feel successful if we really created a blueprint for what this work is. I think because it's such a new endeavor for us, as the city really taking on its part in what I call a cultural ecosystem. And so for me, that's individual artists, that's the cultural organizations, that's the community at large. So it's residents, but also the businesses and arts and entertainment activity that exists. But cultural policy is like that last, piece of the puzzle, if you will, that really is the government's validation of the arts as a viable entity within the city. Not only just economically, but like we value the humans that create and make our city a place worth living. And so in this first year, we're kind of framing it as the blueprint year. And that would be really, on the other side, I'm going to be smiling and dancing circles maybe around crosstown. If we launch a real viable resource hub for creative entrepreneurs through the city. So not just duplicating, the services like of Memphis Tourism or Arts Memphis, but creating a system of information and network building for entities to be able to sustain their careers here as individual artists and cultural entrepreneurs. That, amongst other things, we're looking at a Memphis Poet Laureate program to, really lift up the literary community here that has been active for years, but just not seeing as much support, and a number of other entities, or initiatives. But yeah, I think those like two things I think will be really nice to see. Those two things, but then one more thing would be some small scale investments, some micro grants for-profit businesses, music venues, so that we have like a really nice, the venues have nice spaces for artists and musicians to perform. And so
that's a big agenda. That's a wide from, institutions to other entities to individuals. What do you have a sense at this point, the budget you'll have for the funding of these kinds of endeavors?
Yeah. So not fully. So we're looking at like the micro grants probably have like 25,000 just like as a pilot program for that. My office is, the budget is about 500K for this first year. That includes 2 other positions in mine. But it also gives us about 125K runway to experiment a little bit for this first year.
To what, again, remind everyone we're here with DeMarcus Suggs. He's the Director of Creative and Cultural Economy for the City of Memphis, funded by outside philanthropy. And to what extent is your job, and it might be not at all, sort of facilitating, and you've got lots of different organizations, lots of different venues, lots of different music entities, for-profit and non-profit, that come together to support. Like, is it to get in front of them? Is it to bring them together? You know what I'm trying to get at? Like this idea that there's not duplication of other efforts, but there's a kind of way in which everybody has more success.
Yeah, I think it's both and, in the sense that clearly I'm new to this space. And so there have been folks and players in the field that have been doing this work for much longer than the 3 months that I've been here on the ground. And so respecting that labor that already exists, learning from that, but also, inviting folks, what I call, to play with me in contact improv. And so I was a dance artist that transitioned into arts administration. And one of the practices that I learned that's been formative to how I approach collaboration is that sometimes you lead, sometimes you follow, and sometimes you figure it out together. And it's kind of this mutuality. And what I have benefited from is that there's so much research, there's so much coalition building and relational, rapport in the sector already, that I get to come alongside and ideally, guide in some ways, but also learn from and maybe just uplift and support.
It's interesting. You think about, this is the first ever position like this. This office is new. I think Rachel Knox from the Hyde Foundation, who's been, like you said, has been instrumental. She was quoted in Daily Memphian talking about how most other cities of this size, or of 500,000 or more, have had this position. Memphis took a minute, and now it does. And in some ways, it's foreign, right? As much as I'm an arts supporter, but I'm thinking this through as we talk. But you think about construction, you think about new business, you think about somebody opening a restaurant. There's a huge amount of city, county government infrastructure that facilitates the food safety permitting, the road size and not how much parking, what kind of sewer impact this new building is going to have. Are there incentives involved? What are those incentives? Then, there's a massive multi-million dollar, multi-headed, some would say maybe a little bit too massive, but whatever. There's a certain amount of acceptance that you've got to have all this public works, all that support, whether it's a warehouse, it's a data center, it's a little restaurant, it's a food truck, and yet there hasn't really been that for arts, right? Is that kind of a fair parallel? I
think it's completely fair. And I think it's really points to how the sector itself has kind of had to, in the absence of those kinds of, we call that cultural policy. It's the regulations, and I mentioned validation earlier, but it's like we government taking ownership of its stake in the cultural fabric and the economic vibrancy of the creative sector. And so, yeah, I think you brilliantly actually made the parallel.
I did something brilliant, Natalie.
Yeah.
I was Natalie Van Gundy, producer sitting over here. I just want her to know that I did something brilliant. No, but I appreciate that because it is interesting to try to frame it up as this isn't, there is also it is the office not just of creative, but also creative and cultural, but economy. There's all this, and we've interviewed tons of artists and arts organizations over the years, and there is this, they are independent business people, or they may be a nonprofit arts organization, but boy, they got to generate revenue and have impact, or it's not just a free lunch to be a nonprofit. So it's interesting to frame it. Now, I want to come back to some of the things I just brought up, but I will do a little housekeeping here in the middle. Remind everyone, we're with DeMarcus Suggs. He's the Director of Creative and Cultural Economy, a new position at the City of Memphis. I am Eric Barnes, and this is The Sidebar, which airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. Focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It is not just a radio show, though. It's one of a number of weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including the Memphis Grizzlies podcast with Drew Hill and Chris Harrington, our food podcast, Sound Bites, with Holly Whitfield and Jennifer Chandler, and sometimes even me, which also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11. We also host the podcast version of Behind the Headlines, the TV show we produce with the folks at WKNO every week. And all of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, as well as iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get these WYXR shows, the Sidebar and Soundbites, at WYXR.org, or go to the WYXR app. That includes all the shows, talk, music, archives of all the shows that WYXR airs every day of every week. Also, support WYXR. It's nonprofit, listener-supported radio. Become a member. You get all kinds of benefits if you do so. You can get to those on the site or on the app, or you can just do a one-off donation. But it is donations that support WYXR. And if you're not a paid subscriber to the Daily Memphian, do consider becoming one. Paid subscriptions are what really support the bulk of what we do at the Daily Memphian, as well as advertising, sponsorships, and a certain amount of philanthropy, as I mentioned earlier. Coming up soon, I think next week, is Paul Chandler from GPAC. We're talking about what's going on with GPAC. We've been trying to get Paul in for a long time, so we're excited to have him. We recently had Todd Richardson from Crosstown. He's president of Crosstown Concourse and all its attendant entities. We talked about all kinds of things going on at Crosstown, but we also talked a ton about the new venue that's being built in partnership with Live Venue, Ticketmaster, right across the street. It was a great conversation. We learned a lot about kind of how that all came about. It was worth listening to. We also last week had Kevin Sharp, who is the director of the Dixon Gallery and Garden, talking about, we did it on site at the Dixon, which was super cool. And Kevin was nice enough to give me and Natalie a tour of two of the exhibits that close in the next week. So they are very cool. One it's about trains, but it's really just a really interesting survey of American art. The other is just a mind-blowingly cool collection, private collection from a private owner, from Picasso to Monet to Renoir to Basquiat. It's nuts that it's all in 2 rooms in the Dixon through the 26th. I mentioned Behind the Headlines. We've got this week Mayor Lee Harris, County Mayor Lee Harris, as well as Judge Tarek Sugarman from Juvenile Court, talking about all kinds of things around tough issues of juvenile crime, all those kinds of issues. We recently had a number of folks from the County Commission on. We had some folks from the City Council on, Steve Mulroy, the DA, as well as Brent Taylor and London Lamar. Those are all different shows. It'd be fun if they were all on at the same time. It'd be kind of a circus, like a Jerry Springer kind of situation. But it was not that. It was different shows. You can get all those at the Daily Memphian, or you can go to YouTube, or you can go over to the WKNO.org website. Last bit of housekeeping, our Women in Business Seminar, the first seminar of the year, is coming up on February 27th at 3:30 at the Botanic Garden. That features Tina Sullivan, the longtime head of the Overton Park Conservancy, who recently stepped aside after a kind of crazy, amazing run. Ursula Madden, now at MLGW, was at the City, was, of course, for many years on TV. And Lee Mansberg, who runs Junior Achievement, also used to be at St. Mary's School. So that's coming up February 27th at 3:30. You can go to Eventbrite, search for Daily Memphian, and you'll be able to buy tickets to that event. But we are still here with DeMarcus Suggs, Director of Creative and Cultural Economy for the City. You mentioned before we started, you've got a listening session coming up. Yeah, talk about that.
Yeah, so we have the second of a series of our artist listening sessions that is artists, but also includes any of our creative entrepreneurs. It's taking place here across town at the Memphis Listening Lab on Monday, the 27th of January. Starts at 5 o'clock, and we will really get the conversation really rolling at 5:30. So the first half hour is just a little cocktail moment for us to hang out and get to know each other. But I'll be facilitating this conversation. This one will be around market and demand, which is a hot topic for us here.
Okay, market and demand. So that gets back to this issue of, I've interviewed lots of artists, and it's interesting. Like Bird Cap, who does a lot of urban art murals. He did a exhibit here, a bunch of his work. I think that's when we interviewed him. But you'll see his work around town, and he talked about this constant balancing act that artists face of doing the work he wants to do, that he's driven to do, but also taking commissions, sometimes doing more commercial art. We've talked to musicians about that over the years. It's a really interesting balancing act that how you piece together a living if you're an artist. And that might be partly part-time barista, part-time artist, part-time painter, teaching, all these different things. But you've got to kind of have all that stuff going on. Is that part of what you're hoping to facilitate? Because not everyone can be a painter full-time, right? Even very successful painters can always be a painter full-time. Same with a musician, same with a writer, et cetera.
No, I think my vision and my belief is that every Memphian should be able to live a creative and expressive life on their own terms. And so with that, if one wants to pursue, creating at a full scale, full time, then I think it should be available. Of course, you have to have the talent, you have to have the training and the work ethic and the ability to make it, because just like any competitive market, you have to have something worth buying, and so that's where the economic aspect of our work comes in. But for the folks that want to have a part-time career or just, sell a commission here and there, I think that's still a viable career if you choose to, work in another industry as well to make that possible.
How much pressure have you felt or not felt because we've talked about not just music. Memphis is known as music, known for certain types of music, but you are very much the arts across the board. Right. Do you feel a certain pressure because of Memphis's history and music to really emphasize that at the top, or no?
Yeah, I don't feel a pressure. I feel an honor, and like a respect. I think it's culture. I just think it is worth respecting the creative legacy that is Memphis. At the same time, folks have been creating in other mediums simultaneously in all of Memphis's history. And so I feel a need to, while we continue to have the conversation, my thing is meet people where they are. And so since the world knows us, for our musical legacy, we can talk about that. But I think that might be the entry point to expanding a person's understanding of what Memphis is and why it's such a cultural hub, not just for our music, it's the people and it's the food, it's the vibrancy of other artistic mediums as well.
The food, that's interesting. Because it is adjacent to art.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah.
Food and drink and the way you experience, all kinds of art. We went to the Dixon. I went back to the Dixon actually with some family that was in town this weekend after I mentioned Kevin Sharp touring around. And we ended in the coffee shop. Because then you want to unwind and go, wow, that was amazing. Those so it's interesting you brought up food and drink as part of it.
Oh, yeah.
But again, with the music thing, I assume your mission is separate but adjacent to, say, Memphis Tourism or the Chamber, which are kind of actively, they're going to promote the blues and they're going to promote Beale Street. And that's part of their mission, right? You are not under that umbrella, right? And not, but again, adjacent to it where it makes sense to work with them. I should make fun of these as questions,
Yeah, so Memphis Tourism is tasked with, ensuring that folks visit and they bring conferences and different festivals and events. And while that might be an aspect of our work, that's not the totality of it. I think that we will have done really good work if we build out an infrastructure for someone to sustain a viable creative career here. From, as some of my colleagues like to say, cradle to retirement, to be able to have access to arts in the classroom, but also after school programs, and yes, so that and
it's and. Yeah. We had, I was looking up, we had Nikesha Cole, who's from Shelby County government. She's I think it's a first ever position or one of the first ever arts and culture liaison for Shelby County government. That was back in the summer. She was great. I assume you will try to work hand in hand with county government on these things, For
sure. And what we've already recognized is that what we can distinguish in this office that, doesn't duplicate the services, because yes, we are partners clearly in this work, is that Nikesha's been able to take a very pointed focus on the creating access through our cultural organizations. And I think that to build on that work, we get the opportunity to look at what is entrepreneurship and individual artists' work. How does that fit into it? And also like our for-profit entities that are not necessarily in the nonprofit arts ecosystem.
Yeah. Well, I mentioned the new event center or the new venue with Live Nation. Yep. I mean, Live Nation is nothing if not a for-profit business, right. And which has brought them certain criticism. We talked about that somewhat with Todd. I talked a lot. He sat silently. But I mean, that's fine. I mean, that's for me in the end. I mean, I want to go see good music, or I want to go see good art. Yeah. And that's what's most important. One of the things I remember talking with Nikesha about from, again, the arts and culture liaison for Shelby County government was she had been doing a bunch of stuff of trying to figure out ways. It wasn't the sole mission, but it was an interesting part of it was bringing the art to people versus not everybody can get to the Shell or to wherever the festival is down on the river. We don't have great, like most cities, we really just don't have great mass transit. Our mass transit is really messed up right now. I won't ask you about that. But you're welcome. Is that on your radar? That notion? I mean, the Shell did the thing. Now they've got this mobile Shell, and Nikesha had some really cool stuff. Just small things, but making sure there were festivals in neighborhoods throughout the city, not just in the biggest of the parks and the most well-known spaces.
Yeah, that's just a huge focus. And so I think of that as like infrastructure, so that to distinguish infrastructure from ecosystem, infrastructure is like the built environment, the places where arts and culture are both produced and consumed. And I think that we have an opportunity to leverage as many public entities or public spaces as possible so that arts are accessible to everyone in every neighborhood in the city of Memphis. On the other side of that, I think that there are some ways that we have not been able to, or just not yet imagined what are vehicles or ways to engage folks. And I think that is where entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial vision casting can come in. And so we get to facilitate that kind of conversation.
With some 5 minutes left here, are you from Memphis?
No, I'm from Minneapolis.
From Minneapolis?
Yeah, but grandma's from here. And I lived here for a year during the pandemic.
Okay. What was that? Well, I won't ask you that. So you're back just that 1 year, but pandemic year. So kind of a strange one.
Right.
You mentioned dance. Give your bio.
So started as a elementary education major. Went to undergrad thinking I was going to save lives through teaching. And that was a viable opportunity. However, I realized I sucked at curriculum. And I was like, that is not my wheelhouse.
Wait, what does that mean?
I was just like the planning, the lesson planning, keeping like the scope, it was just terrible.
The structure.
Right.
That's weird though. Like an artist who didn't like the structure, that's really hard to put that together.
Imagine that. But the only thing that made sense for me was dance. And so I got a BFA in dance from Belhaven University. Had a career as a dance artist with Dayton Contemporary Dance Company, where I got my start. Moved into project work with Dayton Ballet and a number of other ballet organizations throughout Ohio. And so recognized I loved it, but I also loved this administrative strategy kind of thinking around the arts. And so worked on a number of projects and with a number of organizations on all sides of like the arts and culture ecosystem, whether it was presenting the performing arts or, reinforcing support for individual artists. Worked on that at the regional and the national scale. And kind of found my footing in development and strategic planning within arts organizations.
Yeah. Oh, so that's like curriculum.
Yeah.
It's curriculum by a different name, right? Like all that structure and all that stuff. So I made fun of you, but I shouldn't have, because obviously,
oh my God,
because that's stuff. I mean, you're on cycles and you're planning, and last week we had Kevin Sharp on from the Dixon, and just talking about the planning around these two traveling exhibits and the years it takes. I mean, and we've had Ned Canty from Opera Memphis, and we've had folks from all kinds of arts organizations. it sort of pops up on your radar like the fall season, but that fall season was potentially years in the making, right? And the funding that goes with it and the lining up of people. Ekandayo from Hadaloo, who's been on and talked about, roaming or visiting directors, and he does some of that. So when you translate that experience to this job, there's going to be a certain amount of, hey, what'd you do last quarter? And I asked you, what'd you do last year, a year forward? But some of this stuff is, I assume, also like planning for the long term. And in terms of arts and so on. That goes on
for sure.
Yeah. How have you liked Memphis so far? Because again, you didn't really get a taste of it.
Yeah, I mean, I fell in love really quickly though.
You did? Okay.
Yeah, like the artists, I got to meet Tanya Dyson, who at the time she was at the Memphis Slim House in my organization. So I was working remotely for an organization that was regionally based in the South, and we had supported Memphis Slim House in their capital campaign.
Okay.
I had no awareness. I was just looking for a space to like co-work for a day. And ended up meeting her. She showed me around the city. I was like, oh my God, this is like really cool. Like it reminded me of St. Paul, Minnesota, where I'm from in a way, just a river town. Had this nice own vibe, not too hectic. And so I took a chance. I was like, I'm going to try living there. And I lived here. I loved it. I lived downtown in the South Arts main district for a little bit. Ate really well, and so.
But when you say well, you didn't say healthily.
No, not at all. No. I was a staple at Gus's for that year. It was kind of ridiculous.
Yes. I always love having family and friends in town because I will eat. And I'm like, last time I had my high school buddies in town, and we ate ribs and chicken and more ribs. And I'm like, why don't I eat like this? Oh, no, that's right, because I'll die.
Exactly.
But for like a blowout weekend or a pandemic year, go for it. You got to enjoy that stuff sometimes. With just a minute left, I always try to ask people on the show what their first concert was, their first music concert that they attended.
So I grew up as a churchy kid. And so my first concert was Kirk Franklin. Which I thought was like the most revolutionary thing in my little church. It was
And how old would you have been?
12. I think I was like 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
First concert you went to where you used your own money?
My gosh, what's her name? Now I'm forgetting her name. Leanne LaHavis.
Okay.
Yeah.
Up in Minneapolis, St. Paul?
Minneapolis, and she is she's from the UK.
Okay.
But she's an amazing singer-songwriter. Yeah.
That's good. That's really good. For people who want to learn more, what should they do? An artist who's listening, somebody from an arts organization, I know you're 3 months in, but people want to talk to you, I'm sure. So how should they go about connecting with your office?
Please attend the artist listening session. You can find that on Eventbrite. You can also follow us along the City of Memphis's social media. But stay tuned because we're building out our website, and there'll be much more information for artists to stay connected with us.
Okay. Well, thank you very much to DeMarcus Suggs. He's the new Director of Creative and Cultural Economy for the City of Memphis, first ever position for the city. But that is all the time we have this week. If you missed any of the show, you can get the full episode at WYXR, the Daily Memphian, or wherever you get your podcasts. But thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.